I think seriousness comes with sophistication, and that comes with time. Those are the six things that I've noticed that if you can get a combination of any of those or all six, regardless of grade, I think that it enhances the eye appeal of this particular book.
Ben, what makes you so special that the Bible of comic book collecting, the Overstreet Price Guide, wants you as an advisor?
Well, thank you for having me, Keston. I don't really see myself as that special of a collector. I just see myself as someone that's been around a long time and has experienced the hobby in different eras. And so when I say 30 years in the hobby, I'm counting my adult years. I know a lot of people like, well, I've been buying comics since I was 5 years old off the spinner rack at 7-Eleven. Well, yeah, I was there too, but I just count my adult years just to put things in perspective. I would say in the early 2000s, I started submitting sales data to Overstreet on an annual basis, just more of a labor of love. I've always read the Overstreets, in the 80s. It was where you got your information. That was one of the biggest game changers that started in 1970. Then you had the Gerber photo journals. Then you had the internet explosion, eBay in the late 90s. And then I would say you have CGC or third-party grading. And then now you have the MCU. So you have those as major game changers. And in the past, collectors have always had to rely on snail mail. I went to this convention and I saw this book sell for this or trade hands. And that's how we found out, oh, wow, somebody actually paid X amount for that book at that show. And, and that's how we got our information. Everything was slow. I would say that my reports are probably unique in that they are less fair market minded. Not to say that value isn't important, but I like to see myself as a collector first. I always say that I would have all the books that I have, even if they were worth nothing, I would still like them. But the fact that they are worth a little bit, I guess is a plus, but that's not really why I buy them. It's because I really enjoy them. So my area of interest is really primarily comic book history, distribution, and publication, which is a little bit maybe odd and far from what most people would want to think. Why would you be interested in comics? But those are really the three areas that I really like because it really drives my interest, especially with the golden age in studying that early production. So my reports in Overstreet tend to be focused on goofy things like that and not necessarily how much this book is worth now, even though I do mention that stuff.
First of all, that sounds exceptionally nerdy, and we love that over on this channel. And also, too, if you could speak to why might that be relevant to collectors or investors in comic books, knowing all these details about production?
I think when you look at production, you look at how characters were created, why they were created, in their time period. What was going on in society at that time. World War II is a very typical example. You're able to gather a little more information as to purpose behind those characters and books. Then you get into the artists, what resources were available, knowing that, how would we know that this book is selling or this title is selling? Well, we probably won't get data back for, several months. In fact, that's what happened. For example, Superman was on the cover of Action 1, and then he wasn't on the cover again until Action 7, several months later. So we're talking April 38 all the way to, November 38. So you have a range of about 7 months where he's not on the cover, but he's inside on the interior on a story. Well, it didn't get back to them that was, one of the main reasons why it sold, but again, then you go from number 7 to number 10, and then to number 13. And then finally, 15. And then after 17, he's on every cover. So it took a while for that to happen. So I think that's interesting as to looking at that perspective as to the time that they had to deal with and what resources they had to influence how and when things were published as far as characters and the artists that were available. And then also you look at distribution, everything was sent away mainly by, truck or trains back then. And I mean, they had planes too, but we're so used to the instant gratification of today's market. They didn't know what they had back then. And that's the way life was in every aspect. So I don't know. That's just my angle and my approach. I really like and enjoy that part of the hobby as you look at every decade, um, from gold to silver to bronze to copper, to modern age.
And I was wondering what kind of advice you had for them with respect to the knowledge and skills they might pick up to go from more of a casual collector or investor to a more serious collector.
Yeah, I think seriousness comes with sophistication, and that comes with time. And you can only experience that by owning and observing books over a period of time. And again, we're in the period of instant gratification. So things are very easily sought after and accessible. You can just look up covers, type it in, right? Heritage database. Back in the day, if you didn't have a photo journal, in fact, I didn't know what a photo journal was until like 1994. So it had been out for 3 or 4 years. And I remember I had met a guy in Massachusetts on email and when I was in college, and he said, you should get the photo journals because you should study them like you're studying for the SATs, because they have every golden age cover imaginable. And I had no idea what he was talking about. So I went to my local comic shop and I bought the 2 golden age photo journals, and I stared at those probably more than my chemistry book at that time. And I remember seeing these covers, especially the Schomburg covers, and I'm like, where do you get that? Who has that? How many are out there? And so you start consulting all this literature because you're trying to figure out, George Olszewski, he did all this index research in the 70s. And, rest in peace. I think George passed away this past year, but he was a major pioneer in the 70s. And he put a great article together on Marvel Comics in Overstreet number 10 in 1980. If you are a timely or a Marvel collector, you have to read the Overstreet number 10, 1980. It's got a Schomburg cover. In fact, that book in particular has, I think, the best article on Marvel Comics at that time. It was cutting edge. And so, but to answer your question, I think one of the things that I look at with new collectors is that because we're in a third-party grading heavy era, the last 20 something years, I don't see a lot of collectors knowing how to grade. And I understand that grading raw books has some concerns. First of all, because everything is in a slab, people don't know how to handle books because they don't have. So they're not used to handling books. They're not used to counting pages. They don't know, it's nervous for them, especially, they're buying a book that's expensive, and that could be $200 for somebody. That could be $2,000 for somebody. That could be $20,000 for somebody. But I would say to up your sophistication game, I guess, you have to be able to handle raw books from any era or whatever era you're interested in and learn how to grade. That's how I did it. My local comic shop was A1 Comics in Sacramento.
Well, Ben, you provided a lot of images to me so that we can talk about some particular comic books, some things that you look for as a collector or investor. So shall we talk about those?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. Okay. So, Keston, you asked me a question about how to be a little more sophisticated collector. And I talked about trying to grade and handle raw books and become better with grading and not to be so obsessed with grade. One of the things that I've learned over my years is that front cover colors of a cover are really in the eye of the beholder. I know that's a cliche term, but I found that people's vision and perspective of colors are different. And when I ask somebody, well, how do the colors look in hand? Oh, they're great. They're so bright. And then I get it in hand. I'm like, well, they're okay, but I wouldn't say that they're bright. In fact, I think this is a little more on the faded side. So for example, here you have the Larson copy of Marvel Mystery 2 on the left. And then you have a regular 8.0 copy of Marvel Mystery 2 on the right. Granted, scans can be deceiving, right? Light, all that stuff. But assuming that these colors are true in hand, Keston, if someone were to tell me, and they had the Larson copy, and they said, oh, how are the reds? Because the reds on this book are notoriously orangey. like you see. And if they told me that the colors, oh, they're really bright, they're really nice, how the reds, oh, they're great, I would say, no, they're not. Because if I've studied enough copies, and that's the key, studying other copies, with this book, you maybe have limited resources, but you'd have to look up in Heritage or whatever and find different copies or ask people to pull theirs out. You could see that there's a noticeable change, assuming these colors are correct, that the one on the copy on the right, the reds are noticeably brighter or deeper, correct? Whereas the one on the left, even though it's the Larson, it's a little more faded. Now, some people may say, well, how do you know whether it's due to production or whether it's sun fading? Well, you can kind of tell, because if it was sun fading, then part of the book, if it was in the sun, would be faded, and the colors would probably be a little more sustained. But in this case, for this example, those oranges, because we know Larson took care of his books, those oranges are probably how it was when he got it from the Kurtz drugstore in Nebraska. So eye of the beholder, you kind of have to get a trained eye as to what colors mean to you, how bright they are, and also the production of the time periods. Orange and reds tend to be very deceiving and difficult in Golden Age, whereas green, for me, in the Silver Age, is the color to be aware of. That changes a lot for whatever reason. So that's an example there. And if you go to the next one with the Daring Mystery 4, this one is like night and day. I know because the copy on the left is my copy. And who I got it from definitely agrees that this is how it was produced. And so you have the trickiness with the orange and the red in this time period, especially for Timely. And now Goodman had problems with his publishing. We know that Marvel 1 was produced by a publisher in New Jersey, and which led to tremendous, problems with the registration on that front cover, right? He switched his publication to a place in Buffalo. 8 Lord Street is the address because it's in the Indicia. And that lasted from about Marvel Mystery 2 to about Marvel Mystery 6 time period. And then he switched it again to Meriden, Connecticut. So he was always trying to find a good bang for his buck. And as he kept switching publications, the registration and the color seemed to get a little bit better. So this is still early. This time period is, I think this is 8 Lord Street, Buffalo. But again, the reds are a problem. I don't know why, but and even the blues here in the suit, is a little bit of a contrast, and even the green. So in general, the colors are a little faded overall. But I guess my point was specifically with orange and red with these 2 books, the Marvel Mystery and the Daring. So here we have 2 examples of FF1. The one on the left is my personal copy. I'm not too excited about the level of the green hue as far as the one on the right. The one on the right is a copy I owned. It's the copy I traded Harley Yee actually towards that Detective 31, which is why I was a little distraught about missing it, because the colors were so fantastic at that time, and it took me a while to figure out, wow, it's not easy to get that deep of a green on the monster. Now, that's only if you care, right? And I'll talk a little bit about FF1 in particular. I've got like 6 check boxes to find the perfect FF1 as far as eye appeal. I'm not talking about condition. I'm talking about what I look for. So one of them is a dark green monster. That's just my preference. I like the one on the right. Some people don't care. But for me, aesthetically, I want to try to find a copy one on the right. I'm stuck with the one on the left for now. Part of it is because I've had it for a long time, and just not motivated to buy a new one. But if I'm going to advise somebody, I would say, hey, check it out. Doesn't the green monster look a little bit better for you when it's dark? I think so, but mileage will vary. Take a look at a lot of copies, see what you can find, and you figure out what you like. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. This is just more of a preference. But again, we're looking at trying to up our game as far as sophistication, right? We're beyond grade, we're beyond value. We're looking at details here in these paper artifacts.
All right.
So the next one would be the FF6, which is also a green problem. And here I have 3 examples that perfectly display Dr. Doom. as far as the lime green is concerned. Look at the one on the left. And I'm talking mainly about his armor and his hands, his cape and his cowl and his boots. Not really his arms and his chest area, because that's not really as important to me. But you see how the deepness of the green darkens from left to right.
Mm-hmm.
The one on the right is the one that I like, and actually that's the one I still haven't found one, been able to secure one that dark. The one in the middle I have two copies. The one in the middle is the one that I currently have that's raw, and then I have another one that's very close. That when I got the pictures initially, looked like it was closer to a darker green, and I got it in hand. I go, no, this is about the same as the copy I have already. So again, it did not work out, but that's okay. But again, if this is your thing, start looking at this level of sophistication. Does that matter to you? I personally think the one on the right, the dark green gloves, hood and cape and the boots, I think that looks better on this particular book than the one in the middle, than the one on the left. You decide. You can even see a little bit of the darkness in Dr. Doom's energy beams coming out of his hands, slightly darker too. So, but again, that's another great example of dark green, especially in the Silver Age, that for whatever reason, the production, whether it was at the end of the paint roller and, the one on the left was, hey, that was towards the end of the print run and the color needed to be refreshed. And the one on the right, that was, really early. And so you got fresher color, who knows? But again, there is a difference. I think that's the key. There is a difference. And if it matters to you on particular books or all books, start scrutinizing those colors a little more carefully and find the copy that fits for you. Because if you're like me, it'll start bugging you. And because it's silver, hey, I can look all day long for a plethora of examples to find one that I like. Where it's gold, well, got to take the daring 4 while you can, because that's the only one I have. So I'll just go with what's there.
Okay, so what you got next?
Let's go with the X-Men 1. This is the last example for the greens. Shout out to CW, my friend Chris, who is me and him kind of obsessed over this together over the last 4 or 5 years. And that's the dark green boxes. Everyone, for the most part, is up to speed on this one. And some people don't care, and it doesn't matter to them. And that's great. I'm not saying you have to, but again, eye of the beholder. If colors mean anything, just know that there is a difference. So let's start at the top. This was a copy I used to own probably about 6 years ago. And, you can see they're green. There's 2 green boxes in the sidebar, which extends all the way up. You can't see, but it's also green above Cyclops' head. And then you have the Don't Miss This Fabulous First Issue box. It's green, but, I wouldn't say it's dark green, even if I didn't have anything compared to, right? And then you go to the middle one, and it's noticeable. That is darker. It's noticeably darker than the first one. I personally like it. I also have a little bit of a comparison that when you have dark green boxes, you tend to get a darker red logo or darker reds on this particular book. And then you go to the last one, which for me, and I've seen this book in hand, I don't own it. It's a low grade book, and I should have bought it when I had the chance, because this was probably the darkest green of a low grade affordable X-Men 1 that I personally saw in hand for many years. And look at the darkness on those boxes. I mean, that's like forest green, right? Christmas tree green, whatever you want to call it. It's noticeably different and darker than the first 2. Now, all grades the same, let's say everything, white pages, whatever you want. Which one do you want? Of course, you probably have to look at the whole cover to get the full effect, but based on what you see, does it matter to you? Maybe not. For me, price aside, I'm taking the one on the bottom. But if you go to the next slide there, it should be a picture of a Mystic 5. Here's the next level, I guess, in sophistication. If you're bored looking at colors, or you're not interested in that, something that might appeal to you is, let's start looking at how much cover art is shown or not shown on edges of a book. Now, we know that the original art expands out the covers. So there is artwork that was present on the original art page that went to print, and they had to cut it to size it down. And you may not have ever saw it on a cover. So for example, most Golden Age covers were always signed by the artist. For example, Alex Schomburg, one of our favorite artists, Keston, what percentage of covers do you say he's probably signed? Either Zila or Schomburg, somewhere. It's like, where's Waldo? Would you say a high percentage?
Yeah, I was going to say 75, 80% at least.
Yeah. And I can almost guarantee that other 20 to 25% was there on the original art, but he placed it somewhere where they cut it, it just cut it off. So if you don't see a signature of an artist where normally he signs it, he probably did on the original art, but it just didn't get produced. So I use that as an example because miscut covers can change how much art is shown, right? How the art is affected. And for me, that's a big deal. So here's an example of Mystic Comics 5, December 1940s, came out a couple of weeks before Cap 1. In fact, there's an ad for Cap 1 on the inside cover. This is not a deal breaker for me, but I have 2 copies of this book by chance. And there is something interesting about the hook on the bottom, the black marble foot here, left foot. You can see that the top copy, most, if not all, the hook is shown, right? It's not miscut. Whereas the bottom one, the edge of his toes and the bottom of that edge of that hook is cut off in the production. Probably very subtle for most people. And I would say, yeah, it is pretty subtle. But what could become a problem is if that bottom part of the plus other great features, if the words or the letters, if that got cut off, let's say even more on a particular copy, that would be something that I would be bothered by. Because if I know it's there, I wouldn't want it to say plus other feature, and you can't even read it, right? Because it's miscut. Again, granted, given price, condition, and all that, that may change your rarity, obviously, whether you buy that particular copy. But again, that's an example of a more sophisticated approach to collecting. Let's look at the bottom edges here. If you have a spine rolled book, that's going to pull the cover to the back of the cover. You may find more right edge art showing, but more of the cover art near the spine to the back. And that may bother you, whether it's a word balloon or a box or someone's face that now you can't see, right? Same thing with the cover edge, being miscut, on Silver Age, sometimes, people don't like the CCA stamp cut or the number box or some artwork, which I'll give you an example of here next. If you go to the next picture here, it should be the Submariner foot, which I just realized this about 2 years ago. I was studying those greens on Dr. Doom for a long time. I stumbled upon another subtle gem that I'm absolutely nuts for now. Not because Submariner's coming out in the movies in the next week or no, but obviously I'm a timely guy, so I like Submariner. But look at this. This is the bottom corner, right-hand corner of the cover of Fantastic Four #6, 1962. And I would say from 2 years of observing this, and it's not a big sample size, but for what I have seen so far, I would say that at least 80 to 85% of the copies have a cut off foot, the one on the left. You're going to get toes cut off on Submariner. His left foot, okay. The one in the middle is a raw copy that I've owned for 20 something years, actually 30 years. And you see some of his toes there, right? It's not fully complete, but you have some miscut, but you see more of his toes, obviously. And the one on the right, that's the copy I bought 2 years ago, which I thought had darker greens, but in hand it didn't. And I was okay with it because I knew it had a full stubby foot, left foot. And that's what I like, So now you have a full stubby foot here, which it's in the corner. So it's very subtle. No, the average collector, or even the most seasoned collector, might not even pay attention because they're looking at so busy looking at creases and chips and writing and page quality and that big, nice number in the corner of the CGC label. But I'm looking for that foot. When I see an FF6, I'm looking at that foot. looking for the dark greens on Dr. Doom. Again, pretty nerdy. Some people may not care, and that's okay, but I'm just sharing my experiences, what to look for when you're looking at miscut covers. Now, a spine roll really isn't going to affect the art here because it's going to pull it to the left. So, what you're looking at is the bottom, okay? And we know the original art that Kirby did had a foot. Well, how do we know? Because I can look at it right here. It's just that not many copies expose that foot in production. Now, if we go to the next example, Fantastic Four #7. This is one that I discovered a couple of years ago too. And this one is a little more obvious. And for me, what I mean obvious is that it pops. And so here you have the famous UFO cover, and you have 4 degrees of I guess, exposure of the left edge of this billboard sign. And at the end, I'll show you a picture of how it looks when you compare them. But the one on the left is actually a 9.2 copy I used to own years ago, I think around 2003 or whatnot. I didn't know anything about this, art or anything at the time. I was just buying because I liked the books, and I was tampering with high grade. And if you look on the one on the left, there's no red bar, right? There's no red border for that billboard sign. It's completely it's wrapped to the back, actually, right? In fact, that's what happened. So no big deal, right? I can still read the words. It looks fine. And then you progress to the right, and now you have a little bit of a slither of the red. Okay. Yeah, it looks more enhancing, I think, in my opinion, if you stare at it long enough. And then you keep going, and now we have more of the red border exposed, right? And then finally you get to the one on the left, and not only do you have a full red border, but you also see a slither of that dark blue background of that book, which looks really nice when it's not creased up. And if you look at the entirety of it, and we'll take a look at the whole cover, it pops. This is more noticeable than the subby foot because it's right on the spine, and the billboard's so strong in your face that it looks a lot better, especially when that blue slither is next to parallel and showing on the front, which is kind of tough to find on this book. Most of the copies are going to be somewhere between the first 3 on the left, and the one on the right, you might not find it as much. And if it's a low grade beater, it might not look as nice because the creases are going to color break on that dark blue, and it's not going to pop as nice. So if you go to the next slide.
Yeah, and Ben, just a comment too. It looks like on that last copy, the one that's on the right, looks like the staple placement is perfect. And so it seems to me that's what that book was intended to look like. Yeah. And as we know, manufacturing in the 60s and before, a lot of variability, and oftentimes those staples weren't placed in the right place.
Yeah. They're on the back. One's on the front, one's on the back. They're all over the place, right? Yeah. So yeah, and that's another good point. Staples have never really been a big detail for me. I don't really care whether they're on the back. I mean, obviously I would like them centered, but it's not a deal breaker for me. But I know some collectors that, oh my gosh, those staples better be flush on the spine, or they don't care how nice it looks, right? You go to the next picture. Let's take a look at the right edge. And I only started studying the right edge of this book because the border was driving me crazy. So this is the same copies of you just saw, but the right side of the same copies. So you can see how the first one was miswrapped to the back cover, and you can see how you're going to get naturally more of the word bubble coming out of the UFO, which is kind of a thing for me. I like to have full word bubbles, word balloons, not miscut. You see the big explosive red sign that's got a lot of margin between that and the edge, and then obviously the CCA code, the comics code is full and not miscut. For some people that's a big deal. I kind of like it when it's spaced out like that, but it's kind of tough to get that on one edge and then get the full red border with the blue on the other side. Usually you have to make up your mind, and as we go to the right, we know that we're getting more red border as we go to the right. And what's happening to the edge is getting less margin. You're getting more miscut on the word balloon coming out of the UFO. The red sparkle sign is relatively unchanged. You don't get too much there, but definitely the CCA, the approval code is definitely getting close to the edge. So you kind of have to pick your battle. For me on this book, it's just kind of too hard to get the both worlds. And I felt like the red border with the blue background is more appealing. So I think that is kind of trumps over whatever is on that right edge. Then obviously you get the cover art at the bottom with, the guy with the mob stick. He's got more of a full ear on the one on the left because it's so miswrapped that you can see more of his ear. And then as you go to the right, what happens to his ear? Goes away, right? You see less and you see no ear, right? And then the space between his hand and the edge gets smaller. So again, little details like that. Find out what book it matters to you. It may not matter at all. Certain books that are your favorite, you may discover, wow, there's some art here that's missing. And I'd really like a copy that has fuller art on the right edge. Well, there you go. Now you can search for something. When you're bored, you can go and look for something that's unique. I have a couple of copies of this book, and one shows the one in the second to the left is one of mine where you get a little slither of red, and then the other one is you get a little bit of a slither of blue, but not enough. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see two good examples of no red border and then a red border with the blue background. Here you go. So the one on the right is the 9.2 copy I owned 20 something years ago that I didn't know any different. And again, no red border, no blue border. The one on the left, now don't you agree that pops more? You get that red border along the spine and you have a slither of blue. I mean, that just brings it out more. I mean, I feel like the billboard is kind of sticking out of the page for me. Subtle detail, well, not as subtle as the subby foot. Subby foot, I think, is subtle, but this is like right as the center of the cover. And I think it's more obvious. I think this is nicer to have the red border. And if you can, to get the blue as well.
Yeah, what's funny about this particular one, Ben, is that it's not just a wrapping issue.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's missized to begin with. And so you have to choose your poison. Do you want to have it better looking on the right-hand side of the cover, or do you want to have it better looking at the spine? So I think that's just a great example.
That's the joy of being a collector, right? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, it's just, what do you prefer? And I didn't know what I didn't know when I first started collecting. I had no idea. I just wanted a copy of the book. The other thing that bothers me on these 12-cent bubbles, which I love, from 61 and 62, is the miscut. You see the high grade copy. Wow, it's a 9.2, but look at the bubble. The one is miscut. It's not miscut. It's miswrapped to the back. That absolutely drives me crazy now. I mean, how great it is. I want a full 12-cent bubble. And in this case, I want a red border minimum, and preferably the blue border on the left, and the right, I can make concessions with. I'm not as crazy about, but that's just a pet peeve of mine. I got to have a full 12-cent. Now we got Tales of Suspense 39, which I think this is a pretty common, people know about this one. This is not really a secret just because it's a big key. But what I'm talking about is the blue space under the table. And this is in the lower left. The top square, you can see no blue. You just see a green table, right? And there's absolutely no blue underneath. It's cut off. Same thing with the box on the right on the top. Literally, I can't see it. Maybe there's a slither there, but I don't see hardly anything there. You get the bottom two. One of them's a beater copy. That's a book copy I used to own long ago. But you start to see some slither there, and there's a piece out or two. But you see some blue there. Mm-hmm. And the best example is the bottom corner, where you see a pretty good, 1/4 inch or so of blue. Now, I think that looks better, when you look at the full scheme of the whole cover, it's kind of subtle, but I think it's, pretty cool. And if you can get it like that, yeah, I would pick that one. Great in price and everything considered. But I think the blue underneath the desk is, most people are aware of that. But some people don't care. I think the next slide with the quotes is a bigger deal breaker to me, because it's more of a bulk part of the cover, which this is really no secret to most people. You also see it on FF48, but it's not as big of a problem. But so here you have when I see the double quotes, is you look at the first one on the upper left, you can see the quotes next to the I in Iron Man, the double quotes. That's always going to be there, right? Because it's in the middle of the cover. But there's no double quotes on the right edge of that. It was produced, miscut. It's not there. The one next to it with the December 11th date stamp, you can see a slither of one of the quotes. If you blow that up, you can see it there, almost a little bit, right? Then you have a progression. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, that pointer. Then you go to the bottom left one, and now you can see a full quote on the first, and then a slither of the second. If you put the pointer right, there you go. Then you get a little bit more. You get all the first quote, but then the second one is a slither, right? Not fully quite. Now, I don't know what the blue looked like on these. It's not the same examples as the previous one. But if you look at the last one, now you got full quotes right there. That's a deal breaker for me on this particular book. I like to see the full quotes. Again, for some people, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's part of the syntax and the grammar, but aesthetically, I like it. The other thing too is if you get double quotes on this, you're probably going to get a full comics code stamp and most likely a full 39 March, which those are secondary, but yeah, I prefer there to be a margin, a space there, so I can see a little bit of green between that and the edge of the cover. But this is a pretty common one most people know about. Spider-Man 15 is also a double quote cover that people overlook. The Craven one, there's double quotes on that one that often get miscut. And again, FF48 is the other one I can think of. Anyway, here are my 6 checklist items for an FF1. And this is over my years of experience. To get this combination, I think is the best thing, regardless of grade. So it could be a 7.0, it could be a 4.0, it could be a 2.0, but you could still get all these. So number 1, the obvious one, no Marvel chipping. Very commonly chipped book. This book was straight as an arrow. There was no Marvel chipping, so that hits that. Number 2, no smudging in the grays on the sidewalk, the street, or the buildings. This was pretty clean. I think you see a little bit slight smudging on the buildings, maybe ever so slightly, but in general, this is pretty clean on the grays, which oftentimes are smudged with fingerprints and handling and wear. Number 3, a white cover. Which is tough on this book. And obviously this is pretty white. You got a August 10th arrival date there, which I love and it doesn't bother me. But for the most part, that's pretty white, all things considered. And that scan is accurate, by the way, as far as colors. So that's 3, right? 4 would be bright reds. Again, here we go with the reds on the logo and the torch flame. I look for that. That was pretty good as far as my eye appeal goes. 5, the dark green monster, which is, that's pretty dark. That's about as good as the copy I traded Harley back in the day that I showed you earlier. Very, very nice compared to the lighter lime green, which is out there that I don't like as much, but unfortunately my current copy has that. But again, I think that dark green monster makes a load of difference if you look at everything I've talked about. And here's the last thing, which I think is the toughest out of all these, is to find a copy that has no color breaking creases inside the monster's mouth, because that monster's mouth is dark, and that is always, you see some subtle spots there. You can see slight blemishes, but usually there's so many creases and dimples and mess in that monster's mouth. Those are the 6 things that I've noticed, that if you can get a combination of any of those or all 6, regardless of grade, I think that it enhances the eye appeal of this particular book. Great. So again, no Marvel chipping, no smudging in the grays, whites, bright reds, dark green monster, and no creasing or color breaking in the monster's mouth.
Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming. And again, if you want to learn more about Ben, check him out on Instagram, the CGC boards, and of course, the Overstreet Price Guide. Speaking of the Overstreet Price Guide, I read the entire first edition and learned lessons that can be applied to today's collectors. So if you're interested, click on this video. Thanks so much for watching and hope to see you around real soon.